Thanks to Honor for sponsoring this video. This is the Honor 400, the company's newest mid-range phone that aims to bring as many of the flagship features over from their Magic 7 series to a phone that costs nearly half as much, with it featuring the same AI super zoom from the 7 series, allowing it to punch in up to 30x despite not actually having a physical telephoto lens, while also debuting an AI feature of its own that can take any static image from the phone and turn it into a shockingly realistic 5-second video. Inside of the box, at least with this European unit, all you get is the phone and a 3.5 amp USB-C cable. So my first impression of the phone itself is it actually feels pretty premium given its price point. We got it in this desert gold color. Honor also offers it in silver, where you get a nice matte finish on the back, you have a color matched aluminum frame, and this dual camera system that has this little layered design that gives it an almost iPhone-like aesthetic. But it's what's on the front of the phone that really makes it stand out in this segment, with it having super thin bezels. I mean, these are nearly flagship level, and at least compared to the Galaxy A56, which by the way, we're gonna be comparing it to throughout the video, it's kinda no contest. Of course, that's not to say that the Galaxy doesn't have its own advantages in terms of build and design. It's IP67 water and dust resistant compared to the Honor's IP65, and I also like the brushed aluminum look on the Galaxy's frame. Obviously, most people put their phones in cases though, so the thing that you're gonna be seeing most of the time is the front, where in addition to those thin bezels, Honor thankfully gives this phone a solid panel. They're claiming up to 5,000 nits of peak brightness, which is nice for an HDR video, but I think the more realistic metric for most people is global brightness, where in our lab tests, the Honor peaked at nearly 1,300 nits compared to the Galaxy's 1,027. It was able to sustain that for about a minute and a half, so good enough to check your phone while you're walking to your car in the parking lot, and then after about a minute and a half, it did drop down to 921. But even then, because of the new sunlight display enhancement tech, where the phone will dynamically adjust things like the color gamut, the saturation, and the contrast, the 400 screen ends up being easier to read than the Galaxy's, despite the actual brightness in terms of nits being about the same on average. And it's a similar story when it comes to minimum brightness. Honor claims that this phone could go down to as little as 1.5 nits. We actually measured it lower than that at 1.32, which is lower than even the Galaxy's 1.42. But either way, both of these displays go really dim, meaning they won't sear your eyeballs if you check your phone in the middle of the night. Of course, where Honor's displays typically pull ahead of the competition is in terms of all the eye health features that they incorporate. And it's no different here. You get 3,840 Hz PWM dimming to reduce flicker. There's a new motion sickness mode that's designed to help reduce nausea when you're in a moving vehicle. There's a defocus mode, which we did an entire video on the channel if you want to check it out. But the short of it is it's supposed to help reduce eye strain. And then if you don't care about those eye health features, well, in terms of viewing angles, the Honor pulls ahead, where the Galaxy unfortunately does have some discoloration when you hold it at certain angles, where you see those green and purple hues. But look, the display is only half of the media consumption experience. The other half are the speakers, and both of these phones are pretty decent for the price point. They're not flagship level, let's just be clear about that, but they do sound clear, and they get loud enough, but just take a listen for yourself. Under the hood, we're working with two different chipsets, so Honor stuck with the Snapdragon 7 Gen 3 with either 8, 12, or 16 gigabytes RAM, depending on how you configure it, whereas on the Galaxy A56, you get Samsung's in-house Exynos chip with either 8 or 12 gigabytes of RAM. And in terms of everyday use, I really wasn't able to notice an immediate difference. And in our speed tests, in apps like Microsoft Word and in Excel, they performed about the same. Through Snapseed, where we edited the same photo, they also did roughly the same, with the biggest delta we saw being in video exporting, where the Galaxy did outperform. But then in 3D Mark, where the phones are stress tested for a gaming scenario, the Honor did better. So, they kind of go back and forth. Obviously, neither of these phones are going to be speed test champs, but I think for most things, they are perfectly capable. In terms of battery life, while on paper, the Honor 400 has the advantage of that 5300 mAh capacity versus the Galaxy's 5000, in practice, we found the battery life on these phones to be basically identical. Like, we did a 2-day battery test, and they were neck and neck all the way through. They both made it all the way to app cycle and literally died within 2 minutes of each other, so a really good result from both. All right, let's talk about the camera systems. So at a quick glance, the Galaxy seems to have the advantage, right? It's got a triple camera system compared to the Honor's dual camera system. But the thing about the Galaxy's third camera is it's not actually a telephoto like you would expect. It's actually a 5-megapixel macro camera. And the irony of it is the Honor also has a macro camera through the ultra wide, and the shots coming out of the Honor don't just look a little bit better, but they look a lot better. Like, you're able to get significantly closer to the subjects, and the quality is better overall. But I think the main thing to look at with these mid-range phones is the main sensor, since that's where most of the budget ends up going, or at least that's where most of the budget should end up going. And with the Honor, the main sensor gets upgraded to a 200 megapixel resolution, and the sensor itself is also bigger as well. It's 1/1.4 inches versus the Galaxy's 50 megapixel sensor with a size of 1/1.56 inches, meaning in theory, the 400 should produce sharper images and perform better in low light. And in practice, that's pretty much exactly what we saw. In well-lit conditions, both phones look fine, but when you start pixel peeping, you can clearly see that there's more data on the Honor with that higher resolution, and then when you go over to the shadows, you definitely see less noise and less artifacts. But where that higher resolution really starts kicking in is in zooming, because the Honor can just crop in on its sensor, kind of like the iPhone does, where at 10x, the difference is pretty much night and day. And what's cool is with that high resolution, it also allows you to punch beyond 10x. Like, this is kind of, I would say, risky territory when it comes to digital zoom, but with AI super zoom upscaling, it basically makes the photos somewhat usable. Like at 30x here, obviously it's not the best photo, like nobody's gonna claim that it is, but compared to the Galaxy at the same digital zoom range, it is a pretty impressive result. And it's the first phone to achieve this 30x zoom with its main camera, thanks to the large models that it's trained on. That said though, I still wish that Honor would have just included a dedicated telephoto lens on here, since they did that last year, but I can see where the trade-off could be worth it to make that main sensor better. In terms of color accuracy, in our lab tests, we found the Galaxy to be slightly more accurate across a range of different lighting conditions. Although both did pretty well in that department, better than I was expecting. And then in terms of color consistency between the lenses, the Honor did slightly better, with there being less shift as you switch between wide and ultra wide. For portrait photography, I think the Honor pulls ahead. And this doesn't really come as a surprise, since last year Honor partnered with Studio Arcor to bring a number of different stylized looks to the phone where, they're not just filters, these are scenes that are dynamically detecting all the different elements in a photo and then give it that famous studio look where you would never guess that some of these photos came from a mid-range phone. And then this year, they added even more with film simulation modes to give you just more variety for your portrait photography. Plus, the 400 series also gets what Honor is calling AI Portrait Snap, which uses the same model that we tested before for motion sensing, but combined with a dual lens bokeh algorithm, so that way the phone can capture crisp and sharp photos even when there's a little bit of motion, at least in the scenes that have enough light for it to pull it off. So I would say on the whole, the portrait photos on here kind of punch above its weight class. Although I do wish that Honor would also let you use portrait mode with like normal color science, since as of right now, you can only use one of these stylized looks, unless I'm just missing it. On the bright side though, Honor does have a portrait video mode, which is something that you don't actually get on the Galaxy A56. Speaking of video, while both phones look good in well-lit conditions, I do have to give the advantage to the Galaxy in this department, since while Honor's noise reduction works really well for photos, it does get a little bit over-aggressive when it comes to videos. I'm hoping they can dial this back since we are dealing with pre-release software, but as of right now, the slight edge goes to the Galaxy just because even though there's more noise in its image, it looks a little bit more natural than the Honor's image does. But overall, when you take a look at the entire camera system, I think the edge does go to the Honor because that higher resolution gives you sharper images, it gives you less noise in photos, it gives you the ability to actually zoom, which is not an option on the Galaxy pretty much at all, and it does have the edge in terms of portraits. And that's without considering all of the AI features, where unlike Samsung, Honor is trying to bring as many of the features that are AI-based or software-based from the Magic 7 series to this mid-ranger, meaning in addition to the typical stuff like AI object eraser and reflection removal, which by the way just works night and day better than the version on the Galaxy, you also get advanced features like outpainting to expand your background, you get upscaling to basically add details back into images. There's a new moving photo collage mode that allows you to stitch 2 to 9 photos to make some pretty epic looking collages that can also be shared cross-platform with iPhone users. And maybe the coolest feature I've seen in a while is image to video generation. This is actually powered by Google's VO model, where you can take any static photo in the gallery and in around a minute, the phone can turn it into a 5-second video. Like, it is insane how well this works. It's kind of creepy at times, and you even have the option to make it go in landscape or in portrait. Now, it does say it's a limited time free trial. I have no idea how long this trial is. I'll update the description once I get more info, but the results we've been getting from this are absolutely blowing my mind. Like, look at the reflections it made on my watch here and the shadows under my hat, or how it's making this static shot of a movie theater into a 3D scene. Like, I just can't believe how good this stuff has gotten. But beyond the camera, AI is also everywhere else on this phone, as you would imagine in 2025. So you get Google Gemini integration built in, so that power button actually launches Gemini instead of Bixby, which unfortunately the Galaxy is locked to Bixby on this phone, even though the higher end Galaxies aren't. And all new for the 400 series is AI writing tools, where using Gemini, the phone can help you write stuff right there and then instead of having to go back and forth between the Gemini app or between something like ChatGPT. And then Honor also gave it their own exclusive AI like Magic Portal, where you can highlight something on the screen by circling on it with your knuckle and then take contextual actions based off of that to save you time. And then finally, in terms of software overall, macOS 9.0 on top of Android 15 on here feels pretty clean and refined. And one thing that I'm really happy about is Honor has stepped up alongside Google and Samsung to support their devices longer than pretty much anyone else in the game, with the Honor 400 promised to receive 6 years of OS updates and 6 years of security patches. Which, when you're talking about a mid-range phone where you don't want to spend a bunch of money to begin with, this is going to give you even more bang for your buck. So yeah, that's the Honor 400. I think overall, it's a compelling option in this segment. And if you want more power than this can give you and a dedicated telephoto lens, Honor also has the 400 Pro, but obviously that one's going to cost a little bit more. I'll be putting all of the links and info you need down below, including any pricing information as I get it. But anyways, that is it for me in this video. Big thanks to Honor for sponsoring the showcase. Thank you guys for watching. And as always, I'll see you in the very next episode.